Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Thomas Ashford, and I've been a park ranger in Virginia's Blue Ridge Mountains for 15 years. I've pulled lost hikers out of Devil's Den Ravine, tracked down missing campers in blizzards, and found kids who wandered off from their families. I know these mountains like the back of my hand, and I've never seen anything I couldn't explain. Until October 1962. That month started normal enough. The leaves were turning red and gold, and the air had that crisp bite that meant winter was coming. I'd just finished helping a Boy Scout troop that got lost near Devil's Den. 12 scared kids and 2 worried leaders, but we found them safe and sound. Just another day's work. Then Mrs. Morrison came to the ranger station. She was a small woman with worried eyes, twisting her hands in her apron. "My Jake didn't come home last night," she said. "He went hunting up in Haunted Hollow yesterday morning. He always comes back before dark. Always." I knew Jake Morrison. Good man. Been hunting these mountains for 30 years. He knew every trail, every cave, every watering hole. If Jake Morrison didn't come home, something was wrong. "Did you hear anything unusual yesterday?" I asked, getting out my notepad. Mrs. Morrison's face went pale. "That's the thing, Ranger Ashford. Around sunset I heard screaming from up in the hollow. But it wasn't human screaming. Made my skin crawl just listening to it. I'd heard plenty of animals in distress over the years. Bears, wildcats, even elk could make sounds that might scare folks who weren't used to the mountains. Probably just a herd animal, Mrs. Morrison. We'll find Jake." But as I wrote down the details, something cold settled in my stomach. The old mountain folks had stories about Haunted Hollow. My grandmother used to tell me never to hunt alone up there. Said something lived in those woods that collected voices of lost men. I was never one to believe in ghost stories, but I should have listened. The next morning, I headed up to Haunted Hollow with my partner Bill Patterson. Bill was a good ranger, been working these mountains almost as long as me. We brought our radios, first aid gear, and plenty of rope in case Jake had fallen somewhere. The hollow was quiet. Too quiet. No bird songs, no squirrels chattering, no wind in the trees. Just silence that felt heavy and wrong. We found Jake's truck parked at the old logging road, just where Mrs. Morrison said it would be. His rifle was inside, which was strange. Jake never went into the woods without his gun. "Jake," Bill called out. "Jake Morrison, can you hear me?" His voice echoed off the rocky walls of the hollow, but there was no answer. We started following the trail Jake usually took, looking for tracks or any sign of where he'd gone. That's when we found the first strange thing. About half a mile up the trail, we came across Jake's hunting rifle lying in the middle of a small clearing. Around it, scattered in a perfect circle, were empty shell casings. 12 of them, all from Jake's gun. "What do you think happened here?" Bill asked, picking up one of the shells. I knelt down and studied the scene. The shells were arranged too perfectly to be random, and the rifle, there wasn't a scratch on it. If Jake had been attacked by a bear or wildcat, there would have been signs of a struggle. "I don't know," I said, but that cold feeling in my stomach was getting worse. We followed Jake's footprints away from the clearing. His boots left clear marks in the soft earth, heading toward the cliffs at the back of the hollow. But then, about 50 yards from the cliff edge, the tracks just stopped, not like Jake had turned around or stepped on rocks. They just ended right in the middle of soft dirt that should have held his footprints. And Bill and I stood there staring at the last boot print. Beyond it, nothing but undisturbed earth all the way to the cliff. "This doesn't make sense," Bill muttered. I walked to the cliff edge and looked down. It was a 100-foot drop to jagged rocks below, but there was no sign Jake had fallen. No broken branches, no disturbed dirt at the top, nothing. That's when our radio crackled to life. "Base to Ranger Ashford," came the voice of our dispatcher, Jenny. But there was something wrong with the transmission. Behind her words, I could hear a high-pitched sound, like screaming mixed with static. "This is Ashford," I said into the radio. "Go ahead, Base." The screaming sound got louder, drowning out Jenny's voice completely. It went on for about 10 seconds, then cut off suddenly, leaving dead silence. Bill looked at me with wide eyes. "What the hell was that?" I tried the radio again, but got nothing but static. We were on our own. We spent the rest of that first day searching every cave, every rocky overhang, every place Jake might have taken shelter or fallen. Found nothing. As the sun started to set, we had to head back to report what we'd found, or rather, what we hadn't found. Back at the station, I called Mrs. Morrison to tell her we hadn't located Jake yet, but would continue looking. I didn't mention the strange arrangement of shell casings or the footprints that ended nowhere. No point worrying her more than she already was. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those footprints and the sound we'd heard on the radio. My grandmother's stories kept running through my head, stories I'd dismissed as silly mountain superstition. "There's something in Haunted Hollow that ain't natural," she used to say. "It takes men who hunt alone, steals their voices so it can call to others. Never go up there by yourself, Tommy. And if you hear someone calling for help from those woods, you make sure you can see who's doing the calling before you answer." The next morning, Bill didn't show up for our planned search. That wasn't like him. Bill Pata, Urson was the most reliable man I knew. If he said he'd be somewhere, he was there. I drove out to his place, a little cabin about 5 miles from the station. His patrol truck was there, engine still running, driver's door hanging open. A cup of coffee sat on the dashboard, still warm. "Bill," I called. "Bill, where are you?" No answer. I walked around the truck, looking for signs of what might have happened. That's when I saw the tracks. In the soft dirt around Bill's truck were footprints unlike anything I'd ever seen. They looked almost human, but wrong. Too long, maybe 20 inches from heel to toe. And the toes, there were 5 of them, but they were stretched out, longer than human toes should be. The tracks circled Bill's truck 3 times, then headed straight toward the tree line. I followed them as far as I dared by myself. They led into thick woods, toward the mountains, toward Haunted Hollow. My radio crackled. "Thomas? Thomas, can you hear me?" It was Bill's voice, clear as day. "Bill, where are you? I'm at your truck." "I'm hurt, Thomas. I'm trapped in a cave up in the hollow. I need help. Please come find me." Relief flooded through me. "Which cave, Bill? Give me landmarks." "The one with the 2 pine trees at the entrance. You know the one." "Hurry, Thomas. It's getting dark and I think I hear something coming." I knew that cave. It was about 2 miles into Haunted Hollow, up near the cliffs. I grabbed my gear and started hiking fast. Bill was hurt and needed help. That was all that mattered. It took me an hour to reach the cave with the 2 pine trees. The sun was starting to set, and shadows were getting long. "Bill," I called out. "I'm here." "In here, Thomas." "Back in the cave." "I can't move my leg." I clicked on my flashlight and went into the cave. It was bigger than I remembered, tunneling back into the mountain farther than my light could reach. "Bill, keep talking so I can find you." "I'm here, Thomas. Keep coming." I followed his voice deeper into the cave, but something felt wrong. Bill's voice seemed to be coming from everywhere at once, echoing off the walls in a way that didn't make sense. "Bill, where exactly are you?" "Right here, Thomas. Right behind you." I spun around, but there was nothing there except empty cave. My flashlight beam shook in my hand. "Thomas?" Bill's voice came again, but this time from ahead of me, deeper in the cave. "Thomas, help me. It's got me, and it won't let go." That's when I noticed the walls. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see scratches carved deep into the rock. Not random scratches. Pictures. Crude drawings that looked like they'd been clawed into the stone by something with very large, very sharp claws. The pictures showed the same thing over and over. Stick figures of men with rifles, and a tall, thin shape with long arms reaching for them. "Thomas!" Bill's voice was more urgent now. "It's coming back! Help me!" But now I could hear something else mixed in with Bill's voice. Something that sounded like laughing. I backed toward the cave entrance, my heart pounding. "Bill, I'm going to get help. I'll be right back." "No, Thomas, don't leave me. Please don't leave me." Bill's voice followed me as I ran from the cave, begging and pleading. But I kept running because I was starting to understand something terrible. I'd been in that cave before, many times over the years. It only went back about 50 feet before it dead-ended at solid rock. There was nowhere in that cave for Bill to be trapped. By the time I got back to my truck, Bill's voice had changed. It was still calling my name, but now it was coming from 3 different directions at once. From the woods to my left, from the hollow ahead, and from somewhere up in the rocky cliffs. All the same voice. All Bill Patterson's voice, all begging me to come help. I drove back to town faster than I'd ever driven in my life. I called for backup that night. Danny Rodriguez came, up from the Shenandoah station, bringing tracking dogs and emergency gear. Danny was young but smart, and he didn't ask too many questions when I told him 2 men were missing in Haunted Hollow. We started searching at first light. The dogs were excited at first, picking up scents and pulling toward the hollow. But then, something strange happened. About half a mile into the woods, both dogs stopped dead in their tracks. They started whimpering and backing away like they'd hit an invisible wall. Nothing I could do would make them go any farther. "What's wrong with them?" Danny asked. "I don't know. They've never acted like this before." We tied the dogs to a tree and continued on foot. Without them, we had to rely on our own eyes and ears to track the missing men. That's when we heard Bill calling again. "Thomas, Danny, over here!" The voice was coming from a thick stand of trees about 100 yards to our right. "Bill," Danny called back, "where are you? I'm hurt. I can't move." Danny started toward the voice, but I grabbed his arm. "Wait." "What? He needs help." "Listen to me very carefully, Danny. That's not Bill Patterson." "What are you talking about?" "Of course it's Bill." "Bill!" I called out. "What's the name of your dog?" There was a pause. Then Bill's voice answered, Rover?" Danny looked at me with confusion, but I felt my blood turn to ice. Bill Patterson's dog was named Sergeant after his Army service. He'd had that dog for 8 years and talked about him every day. "Thomas! Danny, please help me!" The voice was getting more desperate now. "It's a trick," I whispered to Danny. "Something's imitating Bill's voice." "That's crazy." "Thomas!" Now the voice was coming from a different direction entirely, from behind a rocky outcrop to our left. "I'm over here now. I crawled to find shelter." Danny's face went white. Even he could see that Bill's voice. Ice had moved too far, too fast for it to be a real person. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, we heard another voice. This one I recognized as Jake Morrison's. "Help me! Somebody help me! I'm trapped!" Jake's voice was coming from up ahead, near the cliffs. But now Bill's voice started up again too, from yet another direction. "Thomas, don't listen to him. Help me first." Then both voices started talking at the same time, both begging for help, both sounding completely real and completely human. But they were coming from different parts of the forest, moving around in ways that no injured person could move. Danny and I stood back to back, our hands on our guns, listening to the voices of 2 dead men calling our names. That's when we saw it. Through the trees, maybe 50 yards away, something tall was moving. At first I thought it was a man, but then I got a better look. It was at least 9 feet tall, thin as a scarecrow but moving with liquid grace through the forest. Its arms were too long, hanging down past where its knees should be. And when it turned its head to look at us, I saw hollow black sockets where eyes should have been. "Jesus Christ," Danny whispered. The thing opened its mouth, and Bill Patterson's voice came out. "Thomas, there you are. I've been looking everywhere for you." But its mouth didn't move right, like it wasn't used to forming words, just playing back sounds it had recorded somehow. Danny raised his rifle, but I pushed it down. "Don't. We need to get out of here. Now." We backed away slowly, trying not to make any sudden moves. The thing watched us with those empty eye sockets, tilting its head like a curious bird. "Danny!" it called in Bill's voice. Thomas, where are you going? I need help. We turned and ran. Behind us, the voices multiplied. Bill's voice, Jake's voice, and now other voices I didn't recognize. All calling our names, all begging for help, all coming from that impossible thing in the woods. We made it back to where we'd left the dogs, but they were gone. The ropes were still tied to the tree, but they'd been chewed through. The dogs were probably halfway back to town by now, and I didn't blame them. What was that thing? Danny asked as we caught our breath. I don't know, but it's got Bill and Jake, and now it's got their voices. We have to call this in. Get a search and rescue team up here. I shook my head. Who's going to believe us? We tell them there's a 9-foot monster in the woods that steals people's voices. But Danny was already on his radio. Base, this is Rodriguez. We need immediate backup at Haunted Hollow. Multiple casualties, armed and dangerous suspect. The radio crackled back to life, but instead of our dispatcher, we heard Bill Patterson's voice coming through the static. Danny, Thomas, why did you leave me? I'm hurt and scared. Please come back. Danny dropped the radio like it was on fire. How is it doing that? He whispered. I picked up the radio and tried to contact base, but all I got was more voices. Bill, Jake, and others I didn't know, all pleading for help, all begging us to come find them. We were on our own. That night, Danny and I made camp on high ground about a mile from Haunted Hollow. We figured if we stayed together and kept a fire going, we might be safe until morning when we could hike out and get proper help. We were wrong. Around midnight, the voices started again, but this time, they were closer. Thomas, Bill's voice called from just outside the ring of firelight. I'm cold, Thomas. Can I come sit by your fire? Danny, came Jake Morrison's voice from the other side of our camp. Danny, I found some food. Want to share it with me? And then a third voice, one I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, scared and young. Help me, she called. Please, I'm lost. I can see your fire. I'm just a little girl. Please help me. Danny started to get up. There's a kid out there. I grabbed him. No. List, and to the voices. How are they all talking at the same time but staying in different spots? It's the same thing. It's mimicking people. But what if there really is a little girl? Thomas? Bill's voice was closer now, maybe 20 feet away. Danny's right. There is a little girl. I found her. She's hurt real bad. You should come help. I'm scared, came the girl's voice. The tall man with no eyes tried to grab me, but I ran away. Please don't leave me alone with him. That clinched it. If there really was a little girl out here and she'd seen the creature, she wouldn't be calling it the tall man with no eyes. She'd be too scared to describe it at all. It's learning, I told Danny. It's getting better at fooling people. The voices kept calling to us all night, sometimes separately, sometimes together. At one point, I heard what sounded like my own mother's voice calling me home for dinner, even though she'd been dead for 5 years. When morning came, the voices stopped. But our troubles weren't over. Danny was gone. I dozed off around dawn, exhausted from staying alert all night. When I woke up, Danny's sleeping bag was empty, his gear was still there, but he was nowhere to be seen. Danny, I called. Danny Rodriguez. I'm here, Thomas, came Danny's voice from down the hill. I went to get water. Come help me carry the canteens. But Danny's canteens were still at our campsite. Thomas, Danny's voice was more urgent now. I fell down by the stream. I think I broke my ankle. I grabbed my rifle and headed toward the voice, but I was careful. I stayed in cover, moving from tree to tree, watching for that tall, thin shape. I found Danny by the stream, all right, but it wasn't Danny. The thing was crouched by the water, its back to me. From behind, it almost looked human, if you didn't notice how long its arms were or the way its joints bent in the wrong directions. Thomas, it called in Danny's voice without turning around. I'm really hurt. I need help. I raised my rifle and aimed at center mass. Turn around slow. The thing went still. Then, very slowly, it began to turn. I've seen a lot of terrible things in my years as a ranger. Dead bodies, animal attacks, accident victims. But nothing prepared me for that face. It wasn't a face at all, just smooth, pale skin stretched over a skull too long and narrow to be human. The eye sockets were black holes that seemed to go on forever, and when it opened its mouth, I saw rows of teeth like broken glass. "Why won't you help me, Thomas?" it said in Danny's voice. "I'm your partner. Don't you care about me?" "Where's Danny Rodriguez?" I demanded. The thing tilted its head. "I am Danny Rodriguez, can't you see?" Then it smiled, and that was worse than the teeth, because for just a second, I could see Danny's face superimposed over that horrible skull, like a mask that didn't quite fit. I pulled the trigger. The bullet hit its center mass, and the thing stumbled backward. But it didn't go down. It looked down at the hole in its chest, then back at me, still smiling. "That wasn't very nice, Thomas," it said in Bill Patterson's voice now. "We're supposed to be friends." I fired again, then again. The thing jerked with each impact but kept coming toward me. I turned and ran. Behind me I could hear it following, crashing through the underbrush with inhuman speed. And all the while, it kept talking in the voices of dead people. "Thomas, wait!" Jake Morrison's voice. "You're going the wrong way." "Son, come back here right now." My father's voice, stern with disapproval. "Tommy, don't leave Grandma alone." My grandmother's voice, the one who'd warned me about Haunted Hollow all those years ago. I ran until my lungs were on fire, ran until I couldn't hear the voices anymore. But even when I stopped to catch my breath, I knew it was still out there, still hunting, still calling in the voices of everyone I'd ever cared about. I made it to my truck just as the sun was setting. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the keys in the ignition, but the engine started and I drove toward town like the devil himself was chasing me. Maybe he was. I went straight to the sheriff's office and told them everything. Sheriff Watson listened to the whole crazy story without interrupting, then picked up his phone. "I'm calling the state police," he said, "and probably the National Guard." Within 6 hours, Haunted Hollow was crawling with armed men. Search and rescue teams, state police, even some military folks who didn't say which unit they were with. I led them back to where I'd last seen the creature, but we found nothing. No tracks, no sign of Danny or Bill or Jake. It was like the whole nightmare had never happened, except for the voices on the radio. Every time someone tried to use their radio in the hollow, they'd pick up strange transmissions, voices calling for help, begging to be rescued. Bill Patterson's voice, Jake Morrison's voice, Danny Rodriguez's voice, and others too, voices none of us recognized. The military guys had some kind of special equipment that let them track where the voices were coming from. They all led to the same place, a cave system deep in the heart of the hollow, caves that went down into the mountain farther than anyone had ever explored. "We're going to seal it," one of the officers told me. His name tag said Colonel Morrison, and I wondered if he was related to Jake. "Controlled demolition. Bring down the whole cave system." "What about the men who are missing?" The colonel's face was grim. "Son, whatever's down in those caves, it isn't your friends anymore." They evacuated everyone from a 5-mile radius, then set off enough explosives to bring down half the mountain. The blast could be heard for 20 miles, and when the dust settled, the entrance to the cave system was buried under 1,000 tons of rock. The voices stopped after that. I spent 3 weeks in the hospital. The doctors said I had severe exhaustion, dehydration, and what they called acute stress reaction. What they meant was I'd gone half crazy from fear. When I got out, the military men came to see me. They had papers for me to sign, agreements that I wouldn't talk about what happened in Haunted Hollow. They said it was a matter of national security. I signed the papers. Who was going to believe me anyway? They transferred me to a ranger station in Kansas after that. Flat land, no mountains, no deep woods where things could hide. I told them I needed a change of scenery, and they didn't ask questions. But I still hear the voices sometimes. Late at night, when I'm almost asleep, I hear Bill Patterson calling my name, or Jake Morrison asking for help, or Danny Rodriguez wondering why I left him behind. The doctors say it's post-traumatic stress, that my mind is playing tricks on me. Maybe they're right. Maybe it's all in my head. But sometimes, when I'm listening to the radio or talking on the phone, I hear something else mixed in with the normal sounds, a high-pitched whine, like screaming mixed with static. like something trying to break through from somewhere far away. The official report says that Ranger William Patterson, Hunter Jake Morrison, and Ranger Danny Rodriguez died in a training accident. Their bodies were never recovered due to a cave-in. I know different. I know there are things in the deep woods that are older and stranger than anything we understand, things that hunt not just for food, but for the sound of human voices, things that collect our words, our cries for help, our last desperate calls to the people we love. I know because I've heard them. And sometimes, in the dead of night when the world is quiet, I think they can still hear me. The seismic monitors they put around the sealed cave system are still active 20 years later. Every few months, they pick up small tremors deep underground. The government says it's just the mountain settle. But I know what it really is. It's still down there, trapped, but not dead. Still calling out in voices that used to belong to good men. Still waiting for someone to come close enough to hear. Still hungry for new voices to add to its collection. My name is Thomas Ashford, and I'm the only one who got out of Haunted Hollow alive. I pray to God I stay that way. My name is Margaret Sullivan, and I've been a park ranger in the Great Smoky Mountains for 12 years now. People think it's all campfire stories and helping lost hikers. But the truth is, this job taught me to read danger like a book. Animals don't lie. When a black bear's ears go flat and it starts swaying, you've got about 3 seconds before it charges. When birds go quiet in the middle of summer, something's wrong. That's exactly what happened the day the Morrison family almost got mauled. I was checking the Elkmont trail markers when I heard it. Complete silence. No birds, no insects, nothing. Then I saw the family of 4 walking straight toward a massive black bear with 2 cubs. "Stop moving," I called out, keeping my voice calm. "Don't run. Back away slowly." The bear was already agitated, probably hungry after a bad berry season. The dad started reaching for his camera, and I knew we were in trouble. "Sir, no sudden movements. Ma'am, pick up your little girl. Everyone move backward step by step." The bear huffed and rose on its hind legs. 6 feet of angry mama bear. But I'd seen this before. I pulled out my bear spray and made myself big, talking to her in low, steady tones. It took 10 minutes, but she finally decided we weren't worth the fight and led her cubs away. The Morrison family thanked me like I'd saved their lives, which maybe I had. Mrs. Morrison hugged me and said I was a hero. I just smiled and told them to stay on marked trails. That was 3 weeks ago. Now I wish I'd listened to my own advice. The first strange report came in on a Tuesday morning. Jerry Walsh, a local hiking guide, called the ranger station about something odd on the Elkmont trail system. "Margaret, you need to see this," he said. His voice was shaky. "There's arrangements, made of bones, all through the woods near mile marker 7. Jerry had been guiding these mountains for 20 years. He didn't spook easy. I drove out that afternoon with my camera and notebook. Standard procedure for unusual wildlife behavior or possible poaching evidence. What I found wasn't poaching. Scattered through a quarter-mile section of forest were structures made entirely of bones. Not scattered like a predator's leftovers, but arranged. Carefully. Beautifully, if I'm being honest. Deer ribs curved into perfect spirals. Bear skulls balanced on platforms of vertebrae. Smaller bones, rabbits, squirrels, birds, woven together like intricate basket work. I'd studied animal behavior for 20 years, but this looked like something was studying humans back. Each structure was different, but they all shared the same impossible precision. No glue, no binding, just bone balanced on bone in ways that should have collapsed. Some were tall as a person, others small as a dinner plate. All of them wrong in a way that made my skin crawl. I took photos, measured dimensions, made sketches. Everything by the book. The scientific part of my brain cataloged details. White-tailed deer femurs, black bear claws, unidentified small mammal skulls. The human part of my brain screamed to get out of there. Walking back to my truck, I noticed something else. Every camera trap I'd set up in this area over the past month had stopped working. Not broken, not stolen. Just stopped. Like something had turned them off. That night, I spread my photos across my kitchen table and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. The bone arrangements followed patterns, geometric shapes, astronomical alignments, mathematical progressions that would have impressed a college professor. Whatever was making these wasn't just smart, it was an artist. 3 days later, the first hiker went missing. Tim Williams, 24 years old, experienced backpacker from Nashville. His girlfriend, Sarah Kao, pulled when he missed their check-in. Tim always called at 6 p.m. sharp when he was camping alone. Always. I led the search team to his last known location, the same trail system where I'd found the bone sculptures. We located his campsite within 2 hours. Tent still standing, sleeping bag laid out, food properly hung from a bear cable. His boots were placed neatly beside the tent entrance, like he'd just stepped out for a minute. "Looks like he went for a night walk," said Deputy Martinez. "Probably got turned around in the dark." But I found something Martinez missed. 50 feet from Tim's tent, there was a new bone arrangement. Fresh bones, still pink in places, arranged in a perfect circle with mathematical precision. In the center sat Tim's wallet, his keys, and his cell phone. The pieces were laid out like an offering. We expanded the search grid, brought in dogs, checked every ravine and creek bed. Nothing. It was like Tim Williams had simply vanished into the mountain. 2 days later, we found what was left of him. Deputy Rodriguez spotted it first, a flash of orange that turned out to be Tim's hiking shirt. What we found underneath made Rodriguez throw up behind a pine tree. Tim Williams was posed sitting upright against an oak tree, perfectly arranged like he was taking a rest. Except Tim Williams was nothing but bones. Clean, white bones with no trace of flesh, muscle, or organs. His skeleton was complete and undamaged, every bone in perfect position. His clothes hung loose around the bone framework like he'd suddenly lost 200 pounds. The medical examiner, Dr. Patricia Chen, had never seen anything like it. "There are no cut marks," she told me that afternoon. "No evidence of scavenger damage. No tool marks of any kind. It's like the soft tissue just dissolved." How long would it take for a body to decompose to this state naturally? In these conditions? 6 months minimum, but according to his girlfriend, he's only been missing 4 days. Dr. Chen's hands shook as she made notes. "Margaret, I've been doing this job for 50 years. Bodies don't work this way. Bones don't stay articulated when everything else disappears. This is impossible." That evening, I returned to the site alone. Tim's skeleton was still there, waiting for the coroner's van. In the fading light, I noticed something I'd missed earlier. Around Tim's remains, someone had created a new bone sculpture, larger and more complex than the others, incorporating deer bones, bird skulls, and what looked like pieces of human vertebrae. Old bones, bleached white by time. The arrangement was beautiful in a way that made me sick. I was taking photos when I heard it, a sound like wind chimes made of hollow reeds. Musical, but wrong. Too organized to be natural, too organic to be mechanical. It was coming from deeper in the forest, where the shadows were getting thick. Every instinct I'd developed in 12 years of ranger work told me to leave. Instead, I followed the sound. The music led me to a small clearing I'd never seen before, despite hiking these trails for over a decade. In the center was a structure that took my breath away. Bones woven together into something that looked like a shrine, or maybe an altar. Dozens of different animal skeletons contributing pieces to create something both horrifying and magnificent. And sitting in the shadows at the base of the structure was another human skeleton. This one older, wearing the rotted remains of a Park Service uniform. The nameplate read, Jackson. Ranger David Jackson had disappeared from these mountains in 1968, 7 years before I was born. As I stared at Jackson's bones, the wind chime music started again. Closer this time, much closer. I ran back to my truck without looking behind me, but I could feel something watching me go. Something that appreciated my fear almost as much as it appreciated the art it was creating from the dead. Kevin Murphy was 26 years old and fresh out of the academy when they assigned him as my partner for the investigation. eager, brave, and absolutely convinced that everything had a logical explanation. Serial killer, he said, reviewing the case files. Has to be. Someone with medical training, probably a surgeon or veterinarian, uses chemicals to dissolve tissue, then arranges the bones for psychological impact. I didn't argue. Let him hold on to his rational world for a while longer. 2 more hikers vanished over the next week. Janet Cooper, a school teacher from Memphis. Bradley Ross, a geology student from the University of Tennessee. We found both their campsites intact, personal items arranged in neat piles, and new bone sculptures marking each location. The sculptures were getting bigger, more complex, and something else was changing too. My camera equipment started malfunctioning near the bone sites. Digital cameras would display nothing but static. Film cameras produced images with strange geometric patterns overlaying the normal photos. Perfect circles, spirals, and mathematical shapes that shouldn't exist in random forest snapshots. Electromagnetic interference, Murphy said. The killer's using some kind of electronic device. But electromagnetic interference didn't explain what we found in the cave system near Cataract Falls. Murphy discovered the entrance by accident, chasing what he thought was a fleeing suspect through thick undergrowth. The opening was hidden behind a curtain of mountain laurel, big enough for a person but easy to miss unless you were looking directly at it. What was inside defied explanation. The cave stretched back into the mountain farther than our flashlights could reach. But every surface was covered with bone arrangements, thousands upon thousands of bones, woven together into structures that rose from floor to ceiling like the architecture of some alien cathedral. Deer ribs formed graceful arches. Bear skulls served as keystones in impossible archways. Bird bones created delicate filigree work that looked like frozen lace. And everywhere, scat. Tared among the animal remains were human bones. Skulls, femurs, rib cages, all incorporated seamlessly into the designs. Jesus Christ, Murphy whispered. How many people are in here? I was examining what looked like a wall made entirely of vertebrae when Murphy grabbed my arm. Margaret, look at this. He was pointing at a section of bonework that looked newer than the rest. Fresher. The bones still had a pink tinge that meant they'd been alive recently. In the center of the arrangement was a human skull. A metal dental filling glinted in our flashlight beams. I knew that filling pattern from the missing person report. Janet Cooper, the school teacher from Memphis. She'd only been missing 3 days. That's when we heard the music. The same wind chime sound I'd heard in the forest, but amplified by the cave acoustics into something that resonated in my chest. It was coming from deeper in the tunnel system where our lights couldn't penetrate. We need to go, I said. Now. But Murphy was already moving toward the sound, drawn by the same curiosity that makes people investigate strange noises in horror movies. The poor kid still thought he was dealing with a normal criminal. Kevin, stop. We call for backup. That's when we saw it. The creature emerged from the shadows at the far end of the cavern like a living skeleton wrapped in darkness. 12 feet tall, all sharp angles and impossible proportions. Its limbs were too long, its fingers too many, its head cocked at an angle that would break a normal neck. But it moved with grace, purpose, intelligence. In its elongated hands, it carried bones, fresh bones that gleamed wetly in our flashlight beams. As we watched in frozen horror, it began to weave them into the existing structure with the precise movements of a master craftsman. The creature was creating art. Murphy tried to run, made it maybe 10 steps before us. Or the thing noticed us. It moved faster than anything that size should be able to move. One moment it was 50 feet away, the next it had Murphy pinned against the cave wall, where its fingers touched his skin. Murphy's flesh began to smoke and bubble. He screamed. God, how he screamed. I emptied my entire can of bear spray at the creature's face. It didn't even slow down. Murphy's screams changed pitch as more of his skin dissolved. I could see white bone through the holes appearing in his arms. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed a loose stone from the cave floor and threw it at the nearest bone sculpture, shattering a delicate arrangement of bird skulls and deer ribs. The creature dropped Murphy immediately and spun toward me with a sound like breaking glass. For a moment, I thought I was dead. But instead of attacking, it began frantically trying to repair the damaged artwork. That's when I understood. The bone arrangements weren't just decorations or psychological warfare. They were precious to this thing. They were its life's work. I grabbed Murphy under the arms and dragged him toward the cave entrance while the creature was distracted. He was conscious, but in shock, patches of dissolved skin showing bone underneath. He kept trying to look back at the thing that had nearly dissolved him alive. "Don't look," I told him. "Just keep moving." We made it outside as the sun was setting. Murphy's injuries were bad, but not fatal. While I called for medical evacuation, he grabbed my wrist with his good hand. "What was that thing, Margaret?" I didn't have an answer. Still don't, really. But I was starting to understand that we weren't dealing with a serial killer or wild animal or anything that belonged in the natural world. We were dealing with something that saw humans the way we see art supplies. After Murphy's attack, I spent 3 days researching Cherokee legends at the regional library. The bone creature wasn't something new. It had been known to the people who lived in these mountains long before European settlers arrived. They called it the bone dancer. According to Cherokee oral tradition, it was a spirit that existed between the world of the living and the dead, creating beauty from death itself. The stories described it as neither good nor evil, but something outside human morality entirely. An artist whose medium happened to be mortality. The legends said it could be bargained with. If treated with respect, shown appreciation for its work, it might spare those who understood its purpose. I thought about Tim Williams, posed peacefully against that oak tree, about Janet Cooper's skull, carefully incorporated into the cave's bone architecture, about the creature's frantic attempt to repair the damage I'd caused to its sculpture. Maybe there was a way to end this without more people dying. I went back to the cave system alone, against every regulation and bit of common sense I possessed. This time I brought offerings, a bottle of good whiskey, some tobacco, and my grandmother's silver bracelet. Traditional Cherokee gifts of respect. The creature was waiting for me. It stood in the main cavern among its bone cathedrals, 12 feet of impossible anatomy, silhouetted against formations that had probably taken centuries to complete. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see that it had been busy. New arrangements had appeared since my last visit, incorporating what looked like Bradley Ross's remains. I set my offerings on a natural stone ledge and spoke to it like I would any dangerous wild animal, calm, respectful, acknowledging its power while asserting my own right to exist. "I know what you are," I said. "I know what you do here. Your work is beautiful." The creature tilted its head, studying me with empty sockets that somehow conveyed intelligence. "But people keep coming into your territory. Hikers, campers, tourists. They don't understand what this place is. They're going to keep disturbing your art." I took a step closer, fighting every survival instinct screaming at me to run. "I can help you. I can redirect people away from this area, make sure the trails get closed, give you peace to work, but you have to stop killing." The creature made that wind chime sound, softer now, almost contemplative. It reached out one impossibly long finger and touched my cheek. Where it made contact, my skin began to tingle and burn. For a moment, I thought I was going to end up like Murphy, dissolved and arranged in some new masterpiece. But the burning stopped after a few seconds, leaving only a small mark that felt like a brand. The creature stepped back and gestured to its bone arrangements with something that might have been pride. Then it pointed at me, then at the bones, then back at me. I understood. It was asking if I truly appreciated what it had created. "Yes," I said, and meant it. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." That was my mistake. The creature took my appreciation as consent. It reached for me with both hands, and I realized too late that I'd misunderstood everything. The creature didn't want a bargain. It didn't want to be left alone. It wanted to create, and I'd just volunteered to be its next masterpiece. The dissolution process was surprisingly painless, like being dissolved in warm water, piece by piece. I felt my flesh disappearing, watched my arms thin to bone, but there was no agony, just a strange sense of transformation. As consciousness faded, I had one final thought. I was going to become something beautiful. The new ranger who found me was named David Kim, young, enthusiastic, fresh out of training just like Murphy had been. He'd been assigned to investigate the mysterious closure of the Elkmont Trail system and the disappearance of his predecessor. That would be me. Kim found my remains in the central chamber of the cave system, posed in the heart of the Bone Cathedral like a queen on a throne. My skeleton was perfectly preserved, arranged with artistic precision among the creature's greatest works. In my bony hands was a note I'd somehow managed to write during my transformation. The artist must be fed. Close the trails. Keep them away. This is sacred ground now. Kim read my note, looked around at the thousands of bone sculptures surrounding my remains, and made the same mistake I had. He thought he could reason with something beyond human understanding. The creature was gentler with him than it had been with the others. Maybe it had learned subtlety from our encounter. Kim's transformation took 3 days instead of 3 hours, giving him time to document everything in his journal before the final dissolution. The trail closure became permanent after the second ranger disappeared. Official reports blamed unstable geology and dangerous wildlife. The truth stayed buried in classified files that nobody reads. But sometimes, late at night, hikers in other parts of the Smokies report hearing strange music drifting from the deep woods. Wind chime sounds that seem too organized to be natural, too beautiful to be safe. And occasionally, park rangers find small bone arrangements in areas that should be empty wilderness. Delicate sculptures made from rabbit bones and bird skulls, marking the edges of territory that's slowly expanding. The bone dancer is patient. It has all the time in the world, and it's always looking for new materials to work with. If you're ever hiking in the Great Smoky Mountains and you come across bones arranged in impossible patterns, remember what happened to Margaret Sullivan. Remember that some art is worth dying for, but only if you're the one holding the brush. Walk away. Find another trail. And whatever you do, don't tell the artist how much you appreciate their work. They might just decide to make you part of it. My name is James Garrett, and I've been a park ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 20 years. I've pulled hikers out of ravines, tracked down lost campers, and once spent 3 days searching for a downed plane in a snowstorm. I know these mountains like my own backyard, and I've seen things that would make city folks pack up and head home. But I never believed in ghost children until I heard them singing my daughter's lullabies. It started in September of 1983. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the hills in shades of gold and red. I was working the north sector, coordinating emergency response from my station near Devil's Backbone Ridge. That's when the call came in about the Cessna that went down during a storm. The plane had crashed in a rocky area about 6 miles from the nearest trail. Me and 2 other rangers hiked in with medical supplies and a portable stretcher. We found the pilot and his passenger badly hurt but alive. It took us 8 hours to get them out, working in shifts to carry the stretcher over rough ground. When we finally made it back to the ranger station, both survivors were stable and on their way to the hospital. The pilot grabbed my arm before the ambulance left. "Thank you," he said. But there was something strange up there. We heard children playing near the crash site, laughing and singing. But when we looked around, nobody was there. I figured it was shock talking. Head injuries can make you hear all sorts of things. But his passenger, a businessman from Pittsburgh, said the same thing to the paramedic. Children's voices in the middle of nowhere. 2 weeks later, I got my first official report. A family from Ohio was hiking the Blue Trail when they heard kids playing in the woods. The father said it sounded like a whole playground full of children, laughing and calling to each other. But when they went to Lewis, the forest was empty. "Maybe they were just ahead on the trail," I asked. "No, sir," the man said. The voices were coming from up the ridge, in that thick patch of trees where there's no trail at all. And the sounds. They didn't move away. They just stopped all at once, like someone turned off a radio. I wrote up the report and filed it away. Probably just hikers with kids who moved on before this family could spot them. The mountains play tricks with sound sometimes. Voices can carry for miles or seem to come from the wrong direction entirely. But then it happened 3 more times that month. Always the same thing, children playing where no children should be. The voices would last for a few minutes, then suddenly stop. And they were always heard in the same general area, the old mining section up near Copper Creek. That's when I started to pay attention. I've been in these mountains long enough to know when something doesn't fit. And something about this whole thing felt wrong in a way I couldn't put my finger on. I decided to do some research. Down at the county records office, I found information about the old mining operation from the 1920s. Copper Creek Mine employed about 150 men, plus their families lived in a company town nearby. The mine was closed in 1924 after a tunnel collapse killed 47 people. What caught my eye was a note at the bottom of the accident report. Of the 47 victims, 39 were children, kids as young as 8 years old, working underground because their families needed the money. The tunnel collapsed during a shift change, trapping them all. I stared at that number for a long time. 39 children, buried alive in the dark. When I got home that evening, my daughter Sarah was in the living room, playing with her dolls. She's 6 years old with blonde pigtails and a gap-toothed smile that melts my heart every time. "Daddy, will you sing the bedtime song?" she asked. I sat down beside her and sang the lullaby my own mother taught me, the one I've been singing to Sarah since she was a baby. It's an old mountain song, passed down through generations, something about mockingbirds and diamond rings. As I sang, I couldn't stop thinking about those children in the mine. What lullabies did their mothers sing? What games did they play before they went underground each morning? That night I dreamed about dark tunnels and children's voices echoing off stone walls. When I woke up, I had a feeling like someone had been watching me sleep. The Hendricks family disappeared on a Tuesday night in early October. They were experienced campers from Virginia with 2 kids aged 7 and 9. They'd reserved campsite 12 at Copper Creek Campground, right at the edge of where the old mining town used to be. When they didn't check out on Wednesday morning, I hiked up to see what was going on. Their campsite stopped me cold. The tents were still there, but something was off. They were arranged in a perfect circle, facing inward, even though the family had set them up in a line the night before. All their camping gear was sorted into neat piles, cooking supplies here, clothing there, everything organized by size. The strangest thing was what was missing. The children's toys and games were gone, but everything else was untouched. Food, money, car keys, even the parents' wedding rings, all left behind. I called for backup and we searched for 3 days. No tracks leading away from the campsite, no signs of struggle, no blood. It was like the family had just walked into the woods and vanished. On the 4th day, we found them. They were sitting by Copper Creek about 2 miles from their campsite, all 4 of them alive and unharmed but acting strange. The parents couldn't remember leaving their camp. The last thing they recalled was going to sleep on Tuesday night. But the children were different. "We played games," the 7-year-old told me, "with the other kids. They knew all the best hiding spots." "What other kids?" I asked. "The ones who live in the mountain. They taught us new songs." The 9-year-old nodded. "They said they've been waiting for someone to play with. They get lonely." The parents thought their kids had just imagined it all during their 3 missing days. But when I asked the children to sing one of these new songs, the hair on my neck stood up. It was the same lullaby I sang to my daughter every night, but they sang it in perfect harmony, like they'd been practicing together for years. I drove the family back to town myself, and by the time we reached the main road, the children had no memory of any other kids or songs. But that night, when I got home and sang Sarah's bedtime song, she looked at me funny. "Daddy, you're not singing it right," she said. "What do you mean?" "There's supposed to be other voices, the pretty harmony parts." I felt ice in my veins. "Who taught you about harmony parts?" "The children in my dreams. They said they know you, Daddy. They said you work in their playground." That's when I called headquarters and requested a partner. I wasn't going to handle this alone anymore. Lisa Morrison arrived the following week. She was a ranger from Pennsylvania with 15 years of experience, specializing in missing children cases. What I didn't know at first was why she'd transferred to such a remote station. Over coffee in the ranger station, she told me about her daughter Emma, who drowned in a lake 3 summers ago. Lisa had been on duty when it happened, helping another family find their lost dog. She blamed herself for not being there when Emma needed her. "That's why I focus on missing kids now," she said. "Maybe I can't save Emma, but I can help other children get home safe." I showed her the reports about the strange voices and the Hendricks family incident. Lisa read everything twice, making notes in a small notebook she carried everywhere. "I want to camp up there," she said, "at the Copper Creek site. Maybe if we're there overnight, we'll hear something." 2 nights later, we hiked up to Campsite 12 with full packs and recording equipment. Lisa had brought a professional tape recorder and several microphones. If there were voices in these woods, we were going to capture them. We set up camp just before sunset. The air was cool and still, and the forest felt too quiet. Usually you'd hear owls or small animals moving through the underbrush. But everything was silent, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. Around 11 o'clock, Lisa grabbed my arm. "Do you hear that?" At first, I thought it was wind in the trees. But then I picked out the individual sounds: children laughing, the creak of rope swings, the bounce of a ball. The sounds were coming from down the hill toward the creek. We grabbed our flashlights and recording equipment and followed the noise. The children's voices got clearer as we got closer. I could make out individual words now. They were playing some kind of counting game. 1 for the money, 2 for the show, 3 to get ready. We reached a clearing I'd walked through hundreds of times before. But now there was playground equipment scattered around. Swings made from rope and tree branches, a seesaw built from logs and stones, rings of rocks that looked like hopscotch squares. The equipment was crude but carefully made. Someone had spent time building this hidden playground in the middle of nowhere. Lisa started recording. The children's voices were all around us now, but we couldn't see anyone. The sound seemed to come from every direction at once. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. A little girl was singing my daughter's lullaby. Not just the melody. She knew all the words, sang it exactly like I did for Sarah every night. But she was adding harmony parts, beautiful and complicated, like a whole choir of children was joining in. "Hush, little baby. Don't say a word. Daddy's gonna buy you a mockingbird." Lisa was staring at the tape recorder. The sound levels were spiking wildly, way higher than they should be for voices this soft. And there was something else. When the children sang together, the harmony created notes that shouldn't be possible with human voices. The singing stopped suddenly, like someone had shut off a switch. The forest went completely quiet again. Even the wind died. That's when we heard my daughter's voice, clear as day, calling from deep in the woods. "Daddy? Daddy? Where are you? Come play with us, Daddy." But Sarah was 200 miles away, asleep in her bed at home. I'd called my wife before we left to make sure. Lisa saw the look on my face. "We need to go," she whispered. "Right now." But as we packed up our equipment, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us from the trees. And when we played back the tape later, we found 45 minutes of children's voices and laughter. But when we tried to play it for others, the tape was completely blank. The playground grew larger every day. Lisa and I hiked back to the clearing 3 times over the next week. Each time there was new equipment. A rope ladder hanging from an oak tree. Stepping stones arranged in a careful pattern across the creek. Small wooden figures carved from tree bark lined up on a fallen log like an audience. But the strangest thing was how well built everything was. The swings were perfectly balanced. The seesaw was level and steady. Someone with real skill was adding to this hidden playground, and they were working fast. "Who do you think is making all this?" Lisa asked as we examined a new tire swing that definitely hadn't been there the day before. I didn't have an answer. There were no fresh footprints, no tire tracks from vehicles, no sign of anyone hiking in with tools and materials. The new playground equipment just appeared like it was growing out of the forest itself. That afternoon, we decided to explore the old mining area. If children had died in these mountains, maybe Understanding their story would help us figure out what was happening now. We followed an overgrown trail up the ridge to where the mine entrance used to be. The company had sealed it with concrete back in the 1920s, but time and weather had taken their toll. There were cracks in the concrete barrier, some wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Lisa shined her flashlight into one of the gaps. "James, look at this." The concrete was only a few feet thick. Beyond it was a tunnel carved into the rock, disappearing into darkness. And leading into the tunnel were small footprints in the dust. Children's footprints. "Someone's been going in and out," Lisa said. "Recently, I called headquarters and requested ground-penetrating radar equipment. If there were kids accessing these old mine shafts, we needed to know how extensive the tunnel system was and whether it was safe." The radar team arrived 2 days later. What they found changed everything. The tunnel stretched for miles underground, connecting to natural caves and creating a network that ran beneath most of the old mining area. Some tunnels had collapsed, but many were still intact. And the radar showed something else: large spaces that looked like rooms with regular shapes that suggested human construction. "It's like an underground town," the radar operator told me. "Someone's been living down there." We got permission to enter the tunnels, with full safety equipment and emergency backup on the surface. Lisa insisted on coming with me, even though I thought it was too dangerous. The entrance was a tight squeeze, but once we got past the concrete barrier, the main tunnel was tall enough to walk upright. Our flashlights showed rough stone walls and wooden support beams that were probably installed decades ago. About 50 yards in, the tunnel opened into a large chamber. Lisa gasped when she saw what was inside. Child-sized furniture filled the space. Tiny chairs and tables made from wood and stones. Small beds arranged along the walls with blankets and pillows that looked almost new. And toys. So many toys. Carved wooden animals. Dolls made from scraps of cloth. Balls woven from grass and vines. It was like an underground dormitory designed for children. "Someone's been taking care of them," Lisa whispered. "Look at this stuff. It's organized, clean. Someone's been living down here and looking after children." We explored deeper into the tunnel system. More rooms, all with child-sized furniture and toys. A kitchen area with a stone fireplace for cooking. A larger room that looked like a classroom, with letters and numbers carved into the walls. In one of the smaller rooms, we found something that made my skin crawl. The walls were covered with drawings, scratched into the stone with sharp tools. Pictures of children playing, singing, dancing. But the figures in the drawings kept changing as our flashlights moved across them. Sometimes they looked normal. Sometimes they were thin and stretched out like shadows. And sometimes they had no faces at all. "James," Lisa called from another room. "You need to see this." I found her standing over a wooden desk in what looked like an office. On the desk was an oil lamp, still burning, and an open journal written in a shaky hand. The journal was filled with entries dating back over 60 years, all written by someone named Martha Cowell, who described herself as a caretaker for the lost ones. Her handwriting got shakier as the years went on, but the entries never stopped. The most recent entry was dated just 2 weeks ago. "They're getting stronger. More children come to play every day, but these aren't real children anymore. They're hungry all the time now, hungry for warmth and life and love. I've kept them busy for so long. I kept them from taking what they need from the living world. But I'm so tired now. So very tired. Soon they'll have to find someone else to take care of them, someone young and strong with a heart full of love for children. I pray whoever finds this will understand. The children aren't evil. They're just lonely and scared and lost. They need someone to love them, to play with them, to sing them to sleep at night. If no one does, they'll have to take what they need from the families who come to these mountains. They're calling to me now. Time to go read them their bedtime stories." That was the last entry. We searched the office but found no sign of Martha Cowell. Just her journal, the burning lamp, and a photograph on the desk showing a middle-aged woman surrounded by smiling children. When we got back to the surface, I called the county records office. Martha Cowell had lived alone in a cabin near the old mining town for over 60 years. But according to her death certificate, she died 3 months ago and was buried in the town cemetery. Yet her lamp was still burning. Her journal entries continued right up until 2 weeks ago, and someone, or something, was still taking care of the children in those underground rooms. That night, Lisa couldn't sleep. She kept talking about the toys and furniture we'd found, about how carefully everything was arranged. "Those children are still down there," she said. "They need help. They need someone to take care of them. Lisa, those aren't real children. Whatever we're dealing with, it's not human." But she wasn't listening. She had that look in her eyes, the same look she got when she talked about her daughter Emma. The look of someone who would do anything to save a child, even if it meant putting herself in danger. I should have seen what was coming. I should have requested her transfer that very night. Instead, I went to bed and dreamed of children singing lullabies in the dark. Lisa was gone when I woke up. Her sleeping bag was empty, and her gear was missing. I found a note on my pillow, written in her careful handwriting. "James, gone to help the children. They called to me in my dreams. They're scared and alone, and they need someone who understands. Don't try to follow me. This is something I have to do. Lisa." I radioed for backup and grabbed my emergency pack. The sun was just coming up, but I knew exactly where she'd gone. Down into those tunnels, into that underground world where lost children had been waiting for decades. The concrete barrier had been pushed aside. The gap was wide enough for an adult to walk through now, though I couldn't see how Lisa had managed to move such heavy chunks by herself. I squeezed through the opening and called her name. My voice echoed back from deep in the tunnels, but there was no answer. 20 feet into the main tunnel, I found her flashlight on the ground, still burning but abandoned. That's when I heard the voices. Children singing, but not the innocent playground songs from before. This was different, darker. The melody was beautiful but wrong somehow, like hearing music played backward. I followed the singing deeper into the tunnels. The sound led me past the dormitory rooms, past the kitchen and classroom, into sections of the mine I hadn't explored before. Here the walls were carved with symbols I didn't recognize, and the air felt thick and cold. The tunnel opened into the largest chamber I'd seen yet, and what I found there will haunt me for the rest of my life. Lisa was sitting in the center of the room, surrounded by children. But these weren't the children I'd expected. They looked solid and real, but their skin was pale as moonlight, and their eyes reflected my flashlight beam like an animal's. They ranged in age from tiny toddlers to teenagers, all wearing the rough clothes of mining families from the 1920s. And sitting among them was a small boy I recognized, Tommy Martinez, the 8-year-old who'd bees, and camping with his family near Devil's Backbone 3 days ago. His parents had reported him missing that morning. "Lisa," I called. "Lisa, what are you doing?" She looked up at me and smiled, but her face was different. Younger somehow, and her hair had turned completely gray. "I'm taking care of them, James, just like Martha did. They've been waiting so long for someone to love them." The ghost children, I couldn't think of them any other way now, were sitting in a circle around Lisa and the boy. They were playing some kind of game, passing stones back and forth and singing in that strange, backwards melody. Every time they passed a stone to Tommy, he got a little paler, a little more transparent. The ghost children were draining his life away bit by bit, turning him into one of them. "You have to stop this," I said. "That boy needs to go home to his family." "He is home," Lisa said. "We're all home here. Martha told me about it in my dreams. These children died scared and alone, trapped in the dark. They need love and care and someone to play with them forever." The oldest of the ghost children, a girl who might have been 16 when she died, stood up and walked toward me. When she spoke, her voice sounded like wind through broken glass. "The caretaker is old now," she said, gesturing to Lisa. "But you could take her place. You have a daughter. You understand how to love children." I looked at Lisa again and saw the truth. She wasn't just aging, she was becoming like them. Her skin was getting that same pale, translucent look. She was being transformed into something between life and death, trapped forever as their caretaker. "Please," I said, "let the boy go. Take me instead." The ghost children laughed, a sound like breaking wind chimes. "We don't want you," the teenager said. "You don't love us enough." But she does. She lost a child, and she wants so badly to save children. Her love feeds us, makes us strong. Tommy Martinez was barely visible now. A few more minutes and he'd be gone forever, just another ghost child playing games in the dark. That's when I heard my daughter's voice again, coming from somewhere deeper in the tunnels. "Daddy, Daddy, come play with us. We've been waiting for you." But this time, I knew it wasn't really Sarah. It was them, using her voice to try to lure me deeper into their trap. I pulled out my radio and called for emergency backup. Then I grabbed a mining pick from a pile of old tools and stepped toward the circle. "If you want another caretaker, you'll have to take me by force." The ghost children hissed and moved to surround me. They were fast, but they had rules. I could tell they couldn't just take what they wanted. They needed someone to choose to stay, to willingly become their guardian. "Lisa," I called, "think about Emma. Think about your daughter. She wouldn't want this for you. She wouldn't want you trapped forever with children who died decades ago." For a moment, Lisa's face cleared. The gray faded from her hair, and she looked like herself again. "Emma," she whispered. "Oh God, Emma, what have I done?" The ghost children shrieked in anger as their hold on her weakened. The oldest girl lunged toward Tommy, trying to complete his transformation before Lisa could break free. I swung the mining pick and it passed right through her, but somehow she felt it. She screamed and fell back, clutching her chest where the pick would have hit. "Iron," I said, understanding. "Cold iron hurts you." I grabbed Lisa's hand and pulled her to her feet. She was weak and disoriented, but she could walk. Tommy was unconscious but still breathing, still solid enough to carry. The ghost children followed us as we ran through the tunnels, their voices rising to an awful wail that echoed off the stone walls. They couldn't touch us directly, but they could make the tunnels shift and change, trying to confuse us and make us lose our way. Behind us, I could hear them singing that back, Quard's lullaby, calling for us to come back and play their games forever. We reached the main tunnel just as my backup arrived. 3 rangers with high-powered flashlights and medical equipment. The ghost children's voices faded as we carried Lisa and Tommy toward the surface. At the tunnel entrance, I looked back one more time. In the darkness, I could see pale faces watching us go. Children who would never grow up, never go home, never find peace. And I knew this wasn't over. They'd been waiting for decades for someone to love and care for them. Now they'd lost their caretaker, and they were still hungry for what they needed. They were still looking for someone to stay and play their games forever. Tommy Martinez recovered mostly. The doctors said he'd suffered severe dehydration and exposure, but there was no permanent physical damage. However, his parents told me he'd changed. He'd wake up in the middle of the night speaking in voices that weren't his own. Sometimes he'd draw pictures of children playing in underground rooms, children his parents had never seen before. The doctors called it trauma-induced dissociation. I called it something else. Lisa spent 2 weeks in the psychiatric ward at Charleston General. When she was released, she transferred to a desk job in Virginia. She sent me a letter 6 months later, thanking me for saving her life. But she also warned me that she still dreamed about those children every night. And sometimes, she could hear them calling to her. "They're still down there," she wrote. "Still waiting, still hungry. And they remember us, James. They remember our faces and our voices. This isn't over." I tried to put the whole thing behind me. I filed my reports, recommended that the tunnel entrances be sealed with steel-reinforced concrete, and went back to my normal ranger duties. For a while, things seemed to return to normal. But late at night, when I was home with my family, I'd catch my daughter Sarah singing songs I'd never taught her, songs with complicated harmonies that no 6-year-old should know. And when I asked her where she learned them, she'd just smile and say, "The other children taught me." I moved my family across the country that winter, transferred to a national park in Oregon, as far from those mountains as I could get. I told my wife it was for a promotion, better pay, better opportunities for Sarah's education. But distance didn't matter. The dreams followed us. Sarah kept drawing pictures of children playing underground, kept singing those haunting lullabies in perfect harmony with voices only she could hear. 6 months after we moved, I got a call from my replacement in West Virginia. 3 more families had reported missing children near the old mining areas. All the children were eventually found, but they were changed. They spoke about playing with the mountain children and learning new games and songs. I started researching, using my ranger contacts across the country. What I found scared me more than anything I'd experienced in those tunnels. Similar disappearances near old mining sites throughout Appalachia. Children vanishing for days, then returning with stories about playing with other kids who lived in the mountain. Always the same pattern. Always near places where mining accidents had killed child workers in the early 1900s. The ghost children weren't unique to Copper Creek. They were everywhere in these mountains, waiting in abandoned mines and forgotten tunnels, waiting for someone to love them, to care for them, to stay and play their games forever. Last week, Sarah came home from school with a drawing that made my blood run cold. It showed Lisa Morrison, recognizable despite the artistic skill of a 7-year-old, sitting in an underground room surrounded by pale children. In the drawing, Lisa was smiling, but her eyes were empty, and her skin was the same translucent white as the children around her. "Who is this lady?" I asked. "Ked Sarah." "Miss Lisa," she said. "She takes care of the mountain children now. She reads them stories and sings them to sleep. But she's getting tired, Daddy. She's getting old and tired. And soon the children will need someone new." Sarah looked up at me with her innocent blue eyes. "The children told me you'd be perfect, Daddy. You know how to take care of kids. You know all the best lullabies." I called the West Virginia State Police that night. They found Lisa Morrison's car parked at a trailhead near Copper Creek. Her body was discovered 3 days later in one of the sealed mining tunnels, even though there was no way she could have gotten inside. She'd been dead for months, but she looked exactly like she had the day I pulled her out of those tunnels. No decay, no signs of exposure. Just Lisa, sitting peacefully in a circle of child-sized chairs with a journal in her lap. The final entry in her journal was dated the day before they found her. "The children need me, and I need them. We take care of each other now. But I'm getting so tired, and there are more children every year. More families camping in these mountains, more little ones for us to love and protect." James will understand eventually. He has a daughter who sings our songs now. She knows where to find us when she's ready. We'll be waiting. I'm writing this story as a warning. Stay away from the old mining areas in Appalachia. Don't let your children play alone in the woods. And if you hear kids singing where no kids should be, don't go looking for them, because they're looking for you too. The mountain children are always looking for someone new to love them, to care for them, to stay and play their games forever. And once they've heard your voice, once they know your name, they'll never stop calling. Even now, as I write this, I can hear Sarah in her bedroom singing those beautiful, impossible harmonies. And sometimes, late at night, I hear other voices joining in. Children's voices, calling my name across 3,000 miles of darkness. They remember me. They're still waiting. And I'm starting to think that maybe, just maybe, I should go back and see what they want. My name is Robert Hawkins, and I've been a park ranger for 16 years. I've seen plenty of crazy things in the Cherokee National Forest. Drunk campers, lost hikers, even caught some guys hunting bears illegally last month. That bust made the local news because we found 3 dead bears and enough evidence to put those idiots in jail for a long time. I'm telling you this so you know I'm not some rookie who jumps at shadows. I know these mountains like my own backyard. I can track a deer through rain, spot a poacher's camp from 2 miles away, and tell you what kind of animal made tracks just by looking at them. But what happened in March of 1971 changed everything I thought I knew about these woods. It started on a cold Tuesday morning when dispatch called about a dead camper near Burnt Creek. "Probably a bear attack," the voice crackled through my radio. "Body's pretty messed up." I drove my truck as far as the old logging road would take me, then hiked the last mile through thick pine trees. The forest felt wrong that morning, too quiet. Even the squirrels weren't chattering. My boots crunched on dead leaves as I followed the trail markers to the campsite. What I found there still gives me nightmares. The man's tent was set up perfectly. His camp stove sat neat and clean on a flat rock. His sleeping bag was rolled up tight. Everything looked normal, except for the body lying next to the cold fire pit. I've seen bear attacks before. They're messy, violent things. Bears tear and rip with their claws. They leave deep gashes and broken bones. This was different. The man looked like someone had carefully removed his skin with a surgeon's knife. Every inch of it was gone, but the body underneath wasn't torn up at all. No claw marks, no bite wounds. Just clean, precise cuts where the skin used to be. I radioed for backup and spent the next hour searching the camp, the Via Visha. Tim's wallet said his name was James Parker from Atlanta. His car keys were still in his pocket. His food was untouched, but his skin was nowhere to be found. That's what really bothered me. Where was all that skin? Dr. Mills, the county medical examiner, arrived around noon with 2 deputies. He took one look at the body and whistled low. "In 30 years, I've never seen anything like this," he said, pulling on rubber gloves. "This is surgical precision. Look at these cuts." He was right. Whatever did this knew exactly where to cut. The skin had been removed in large pieces, not torn off in strips like an animal would do, and there was hardly any blood on the ground. "What kind of animal could do this?" asked Deputy Johnson, looking pale. "No animal," Dr. Mills said firmly. "This was done with tools, sharp ones." We spent the rest of the day searching a half-mile circle around the camp. 20 people combing through every bush, every hollow log, every pile of rocks. We found nothing. No skin, no bloody knife, no tracks leading away from the scene. That night I sat in my cabin writing my report and trying to make sense of what I'd seen. I kept thinking about the victim's face, or where his face should have been. Someone had taken his identity, literally peeled it away, and carried it off. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that skinless body lying by the cold ashes of a campfire. 3 weeks later, it happened again. Sarah Chen was a college student from Tennessee, hiking the Appalachian Trail section that runs through our forest. Her body was found by other hikers near the Oconaluftee River crossing, sitting upright against a big oak tree like she was just resting. But she wasn't resting. She was dead, and her skin was gone. This time I got to the scene first. Sarah looked peaceful sitting there, her backpack still strapped on, her hiking poles leaning against the tree. If you didn't look too close, you might think she was just taking a break. But up close, you could see the terrible truth. Just like James Parker, every bit of her skin had been carefully removed. Her muscles and organs were perfectly intact underneath, but the skin was missing. I called it in and started searching before backup arrived. That's when I found something that made my blood run cold. Footprints. Not Sarah's hiking boots. I could see those prints clearly in the mud by the river. These were different prints, walking away from her body toward the deep woods. They looked like bare human feet, but something was wrong with them. The toes were too long and the prints were deeper than they should be, like whatever made them was much heavier than a normal person. Deputy Johnson arrived first this time. He took one look at Sarah's body and had to sit down on a fallen log. "Same thing?" he asked. "Same thing," I confirmed. "Skin's gone, everything else untouched." "Jesus Christ, Robert, what are we dealing with here?" I didn't have an answer. Not yet. Dr. Mills showed up an hour later with the same shocked expression. "2 victims, identical method," he muttered, examining Sarah's body. "But I can't find a single tool mark. No knife scratches, no saw marks. It's like the skin was peeled off." While he worked, I followed those strange footprints deeper into the forest. They led up a steep, rocky slope through a grove of ancient hemlocks and then disappeared completely on a bare rock face. But that's not the strangest part. That evening, 3 different hikers called our office. They all reported seeing Sarah Chen walking the trail around dinner time, 6 hours after Dr. Mills said she died. "She waved at us," said Mark Stevens, a hiker from Georgia. "Seemed friendly enough. Asked us about the weather. Nice girl, added his wife, Linda. A little quiet, but polite. She was wearing a blue jacket and had a big green backpack. That matched Sarah's gear exactly. But it was impossible. Sarah Chen had been dead since morning. I spent that night wondering if the hikers had made a mistake. Maybe they saw someone else who looked like Sarah. Maybe they got the time wrong. But deep down, I knew they were telling the truth. Someone, or something, had been walking around wearing Sarah Chen's face. The thought kept me awake until dawn, staring at my ceiling and trying to understand what kind of creature could do such a thing. Every shadow in my cabin seemed to move. Every creak of the old wood sounded like footsteps. For the first time in 16 years as a ranger, I was scared of my own forest. They assigned me a partner after the second killing. Mike Torres was a veteran ranger from the Smoky Mountains, a guy who knew more Cherokee folklore than most historians. He was also the only ranger in the state who dealt with what the brass carefully called unusual wildlife situations. Mike arrived on a rainy Thursday morning, driving an old pickup truck loaded with camping gear and several books about Native American legends. He was a quiet man with gray hair and deep-set eyes that seemed to see everything. "So," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk, "tell me about your skin stealer." That phrase hit me like a cold slap. "My what?" "Atsila Sagoniga," Mike said, pronouncing the Cherokee words carefully. "The skin stealer. The Cherokee have stories about creatures that kill people and wear their faces. Been telling those stories for hundreds of years." I showed him the files and photos from both crime scenes. Mike studied everything carefully, asking detailed questions about the footprints, the precise cuts, the missing skin. When I told him about the hikers who saw Sarah Chen after she was dead, he just nodded like it made perfect sense. "Classic behavior," he said. "These things learn to mimic their victims. They wear the skin like clothing and try to act human. Usu, ally, they're not very good at it, but from a distance." He shrugged. "You're talking about this like it's real," I said. "Because it is real," Mike replied. "I've seen it before." 2 days later, we got our third victim. Jenny Walsh was a 28-year-old teacher from Asheville, camping alone at Cedar Ridge. A family of hikers found her body Sunday morning, sitting by her campfire with a cup of coffee in her skeletal hands. Same as the others. Skin completely gone. Everything else untouched. But this time, we caught the creature in the act. Mike and I were first on scene, and I immediately started searching for tracks while he examined the body. That's when we heard voices coming from the trail, other hikers approaching the camp. "Morning," called out a familiar voice. "Beautiful day for hiking." I looked up and saw Jenny Walsh walking toward us. She was alive, smiling, wearing the same clothes as the corpse by the campfire. Her skin looked perfect, healthy, normal. But her movements were wrong. She walked too stiffly, like someone learning how to use new legs. And her smile never changed. It stayed exactly the same, like it was painted on. "How's the weather up ahead?" she asked, still smiling that frozen smile. Mike stepped forward casually, his hand resting on his radio. "Pretty nice," he said. "You been hiking long?" "Oh yes," Jenny Thing replied. "I love hiking. It's so... hiking." That's when I knew for sure. Real people don't talk like that. Mike must have noticed too, because he started asking more questions. "What's your favorite trail snack?" he asked. The creature wearing Jenny's face tilted its head, still smiling. "I like food," it said. "Trail food, for trails." "And where are you from?" A long pause. "Place. Good place." Mike and I exchanged glances. This thing could wear human skin, but it couldn't think like a human. "Well, have a good hike," Mike said, stepping aside. The Jenny creature walked past us toward the main trail. I watched it go, noting how it moved without bending its knees properly, how its head turned too far to look at things. As soon as it was out of sight, Mike grabbed his radio. "All units, we have a code yellow situation on Cedar Ridge Trail. Suspect is approximately 5'6", wearing blue jeans and a red hiking shirt. Approach with extreme caution." Code yellow? I asked. Non-human hostile, Mike said grimly. Now we follow it. We tracked the creature for 6 miles through dense forest. It stayed on the main trail at first, but when it heard our radios crackling behind it, it veered off into the wilderness. That's when its human act started falling apart. Instead of pushing through thick brush like a person would, it climbed straight up a 40-foot cliff face like a spider. Instead of walking around fallen logs, it leaped over them in impossible bounds. And the sounds it made when it thought we couldn't hear, low, chittering noises like an insect. We followed its tracks to an old limestone cave system near Burnt Creek, the same area where we'd found the first victim. This is its lair, Mike said, studying the entrance. Probably been using these caves for decades. We could smell death coming from the cave mouth, that sweet, rotten smell that makes your stomach turn. But there was something else, too. The scent of old leather and preservatives, like a taxidermy shop. Mike pulled out a flashlight and checked his service weapon. You ready for this, Robert? I wasn't ready. Nobody could be ready for what we found in that cave. But I followed him into the darkness anyway, because someone had to stop this thing before it killed again. The cave went back further than our flashlights could reach. The walls were slick with moisture, and our footsteps echoed in the darkness. But it was what we found hanging from the ceiling that made me sick to my stomach. Skins. Human skins, preserved and hung up like clothes in a closet. There were dozens of them. Men, women, different age and sizes, all carefully removed and treated to prevent decay. Some looked fresh. I recognized James Parker's face hanging near the entrance. Others were old and brown with age. Jesus, I whispered. This thing's been hunting for years, Mike said, shining his light across the gruesome collection. Maybe decades. That's when I heard it. Footsteps behind us, coming from deeper in the cave. We turned around and there was Jenny Walsh again, still wearing that weird frozen smile, still moving with that stiff, unnatural gait. Hello, it said in Jenny's voice. I like your lights. Mike slowly reached for his gun. That's nice. How long have you been living here? Long time. Good place. Quiet. The thing tilted its head. Are you here to visit? I have many faces for visiting. I bet you do, Mike said, drawing his weapon. But I think it's time you found a new place to live. The creature's smile finally changed. It grew wider and wider until Jenny's face looked like it might split in half. You cannot make me leave, it said, and now its voice was different, deeper, like gravel in a blender. That's when it started taking off Jenny's skin. It peeled her face away like removing a mask, dropping it casually on the cave floor. The skin beneath was gray and wrinkled, like old leather. Its real eyes were just empty black holes, and its mouth was full of teeth that were too long and too sharp. The thing that had been wearing Jenny Walsh looked like a mummified corpse that had learned to walk. Its limbs were stretched out longer than human arms and legs should be, and when it moved, its joints bent in directions that made me dizzy to watch. Now you see, it hissed. Now you understand. Mike fired 3 shots. The bullets hit center mass, but the creature just staggered back a step and laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Bullets cannot hurt me, it said, but I can hurt you, and when you die, I will wear your faces too. That's when I remembered something Mike had told me about Cherokee legends. These things could be stopped, but not with guns. Wild teeth. The creature focused on Mike. I grabbed my emergency flare kit and the small pouch of tobacco I always carried, a habit left over from my grandfather, who taught me to respect the forest spirits. The Cherokee stories said fire and sacred smoke could drive these things away. It was worth a try. I lit a flare and threw it into the pile of preserved skins. They caught fire immediately, burning with an oily black smoke that filled the cave. The creature screamed, a sound like metal tearing. It tried to rush toward the flames to save its collection, but the smoke made it stumble and cough. The tobacco, Mike yelled. Burn the tobacco. I pulled out my grandfather's old tobacco pouch and dumped it into the fire. the smoke changed, becoming thicker and more pungent. The creature fell to its knees, clawing at its throat. "Cannot breathe," it gasped. "Sacred smoke. Burns." The fire spread quickly in the dry cave. Decades' worth of human skins went up in flames, filling the air with terrible smoke. The creature crawled toward the cave entrance, trying to escape, but the sacred tobacco smoke followed it. Mike and I stumbled out of the cave ahead of the fire, coughing and gasping for fresh air. Behind us, the creature's screams echoed from the darkness. The whole hillside shook as the fire reached deeper into the cave system. Rocks fell from the ceiling, and I heard a rumbling sound like an underground landslide. "Cave's collapsing," Mike said, grabbing my arm. "We need to get clear." We ran down the hillside as fast as we could while the mountain groaned and shuddered behind us. When we finally looked back, smoke was pouring from a dozen different cave openings. The whole limestone system was caving in on itself. The creature's screams cut off suddenly, replaced by the deep rumble of falling rock. It was over. The official report said there was an underground gas explosion that caused the cave system to collapse. Nobody questioned it too hard. Weird things happen in old mountains, and most people prefer simple explanations. Mike stayed another week to make sure the creature was really dead, then transferred back to the Smoky Mountains. Before he left, he gave me a small leather pouch filled with sacred tobacco. "Just in case," he said. "These things sometimes travel in pairs." I never saw Mike Torres again. 3 months later, I called his ranger station to ask about something, and they told me Mike had died in a car accident the previous winter. But that was impossible. I'd worked with him for 2 weeks in March. I described him to his supervisor: gray hair, deep-set eyes, extensive knowledge of Cherokee folklore. The supervisor was quiet for a long time. "That sounds like Mike," he finally said. "But the Mike Torres I knew died last December." I hung up the phone with shaking hands. Who had I been working with in those caves? Who had taught me about sacred smoke and skinwalkers? And if the real Mike Torres was dead, what happened to the thing that had been wearing his face? I requested a transfer to Atlanta the next month. City work, they said. Fewer strange animals, more paperwork. I told them I needed a change of scenery, but the real reason was simpler. I couldn't trust my own eyes anymore. Every person I met, I found myself studying their movements, listening to how they talked, watching for that telltale stiffness that might mean something else was wearing their skin. I started asking coworkers personal questions, things only the real person would know. Most of them thought I was just being friendly. A few of them answered wrong. It's been 4 years since the Cherokee National Forest, and I still carry my grandfather's tobacco wherever I go. I've had to use it twice, once in a parking garage in Memphis, once in a diner outside Birmingham. Both times I was right about what I was seeing. These creatures are still out there, still hunting, still wearing human faces. The one in the cave was just the beginning, a paw. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder about Mike Torres, the man who knew too much about skinwalkers, who appeared just when I needed help, who taught me exactly what I needed to know to survive. Was he really trying to help me, or was he just making sure I'd be ready when the next one found me? I guess I'll find out eventually. After all, they always come back for the ones who got away. My name is Patricia Brennan, and I've been a park ranger for 14 years. I've pulled lost hikers out of blizzards, fought forest fires, and tracked bears away from campsites. I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. It was November 1988, and the George Washington National Forest was having a rough hunting season. 3 separate groups had called in reports that made my skin crawl. They all said the same thing. Something was following them through the woods. Something that moved wrong. The first call came from Bill Henderson, a hunter who'd been coming to these mountains for 20 years. His voice shook as he told me about watching something crawl down a cliff face like a spider. Not climbing, crawling, on a straight rock wall that even experienced climbers wouldn't dare touch. "Patricia, I know how crazy this sounds," Bill said, gripping his coffee cup with white knuckles. "But this thing was moving on that cliff like it was flat ground, 8 feet tall, maybe more, moved its arms and legs like it had too many joints. I wrote it down in my report, but I figured Bill had been drinking or seeing shadows. Mountain shadows can play tricks on you, especially when you're sitting still in a deer stand for hours. The second call came 3 days later. Sarah Martinez had been hiking the ridge trail with her dog when something started following them. Her German Shepherd, a big, brave dog, wouldn't stop whimpering and kept looking up at the cliff walls. It was keeping pace with us, Sarah said. I could hear rocks falling from way up high, but always at the same speed we were walking. When I stopped, the rocks stopped. When I walked faster, they fell faster. Sarah was smart. She knew these woods. If she said something was wrong, I listened. The third call made my blood run cold. 2 hunters, the Morrison brothers, had found scratch marks on the rocks, deep gouges that looked like claw marks, but they were 40 feet up a sheer cliff face. No bear made those marks, Jake Morrison told me. No bear can climb a wall like that. And look at the spacing. He showed me the photos he'd taken. The scratches were huge, each one as long as my hand, and they were spaced apart like finger marks. But the span was wrong, too wide, like whatever made them had hands bigger than any person should have. I've investigated plenty of strange reports over the years. Usually there's a simple explanation. Bears can climb, but not straight-up rock faces. Mountain lions are sneaky, but they don't follow people for miles. And neither one leaves claw marks 40 feet up a cliff. But 3 separate reports in 1 week? That wasn't normal. The next morning, I drove up to check the ridge trail myself. The November air was sharp and cold, and frost covered everything. Perfect conditions for seeing tracks. I'd brought my climbing gear. I'm one of the few rangers who knows how to work on the cliff faces. Sometimes we have to pull rock climbers off ledges when they get in over their heads. The ridge trail runs along the top of a 15-mile stretch of cliffs. Below, the forest spreads out like a green carpet. Above, the rock faces rise another 100 feet or more. It's beautiful country, but it's dangerous. One wrong step, and you're looking at a 200-foot fall. I found the scratch marks Jake Morrison had photographed. Seeing them in person made my stomach twist. They weren't random scratches. They were deliberate. 4 parallel gouges, deep enough that I could stick my finger in them. And they were definitely made by claws. Sharp ones. I set up my climbing gear and rappelled down to get a better look. The rock face was solid granite, harder than steel. Whatever made these marks had claws that could cut through. Ugh, stone. Like it was soft wood. That's when I found the first trace of blood. It was dried and dark, splattered on the rock about 10 feet below the scratch marks. Not much blood, but enough to know something had been hurt here, or killed. I climbed back up and followed the trail, looking for more signs. About a mile down the ridge, I found them. More scratch marks, higher up this time. And below them, caught on a small ledge, was a piece of torn fabric. Hunting jacket material. Orange and black camo pattern. My radio crackled to life. Base to Ranger Brennan. This is Brennan. We've got a missing hunter report. Carl Mitchell, age 42. His truck was found at the Ridge Trail parking area. He was supposed to be back last night. I looked at the piece of fabric in my hand, then up at the scratch marks on the cliff face. The cold November wind picked up, whistling through the rocks above me. I'm on it, I said into the radio. But I already knew we weren't going to find Carl Mitchell alive. We found Carl's body at the base of Henderson's Cliff, the same 200-foot rock face where Bill Henderson had seen something crawling. Carl was lying in a twisted heap on the rocks, his orange hunting jacket torn to shreds. The sheriff's deputy, Mike Torres, shook his head as we examined the body. Poor guy must have fallen. These cliffs claim somebody every few years. But I knelt down and looked closer. Carl's body was wrong. His neck was broken, sure, but not from hitting the rocks. There were puncture wounds in his shoulders and back, deep holes that went clear through his hunting jacket and into his flesh. Mike, I said quietly, take a look at these wounds. Torres crouched beside me and whistled low. Those aren't from falling on rocks. The puncture wounds were perfectly round, about an inch across, and they were in pairs, like something with very large, very sharp claws had grabbed Carl and dug in deep. There were 4 sets of wounds, 2 on his shoulders, 2 on his back. "Could have been a bear," Torres said, but he didn't sound convinced. I examined the ground around Carl's body. If he'd fallen from the cliff, there should have been impact marks in the dirt, blood spatter, broken branches. Instead, the ground looked like someone had carefully placed him there. "Bears don't carry bodies," I said. Torres called in the medical examiner while I climbed back up to examine the top of the cliff. If Carl had fallen, there should have been signs of a struggle up there. Disturbed dirt, dropped equipment, maybe blood on the rocks. The top of Henderson's cliff was clean. Too clean. Carl's rifle was lying on the ground about 10 feet from the edge, but it hadn't been dropped. It had been set down carefully. His backpack was right beside it, also undamaged. I found Carl's tracks leading to the cliff edge, but then they just stopped. Like he'd walked to the edge and vanished into thin air. No scuff marks from a fall. No signs he'd struggled or tried to catch himself. But there were other marks in the dirt. Strange ones. They looked like handprints, but huge, twice the size of my hands. And there were 4 of them pressed into the soft earth near the cliff edge. The fingers were too long, and there were deep gouges at the tips where claws had dug in. The medical examiner, Dr. Sarah Kim, arrived 2 hours later. She was a small, no-nonsense woman who'd seen plenty of outdoor accident victims. "This wasn't a fall," she told me after examining Carl's body. "These puncture wounds happened while he was alive. Something grabbed him with enough force to puncture his jacket and his skin. Then," she gestured at the cliff, "then it carried him up there." "Carried him up a 200-foot cliff face?" Torres asked. Dr. Kim nodded grimly. "The blood patterns don't lie. He was bleeding from these wounds before he hit the ground. And look at this." She showed us Carl's hands. No defensive wounds, no broken fingernails. He didn't fight back because he couldn't. These puncture wounds hit nerve clusters. He would have been paralyzed instantly. I felt cold. That had nothing to do with the November air. "What could do that?" "I don't know," Dr. Kim admitted. "But whatever it was knew exactly where to grab him. These aren't random claw marks, they're precise, surgical." That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those handprints by the cliff edge, and the scratch marks I'd found earlier, 40 feet up a sheer rock face, and Bill Henderson's story about something crawling down a cliff like a spider. The next morning brought more bad news. Susan Reynolds, a day hiker, had been attacked on the ridge trail. But unlike Carl Mitchell, Susan had survived. I found her in the hospital, heavily sedated, but awake. Her left arm was in a sling, and there were bandages on her neck and shoulder. "It came from above," she whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "I was hiking the trail when rocks started falling. I looked up and saw it climbing down the cliff face, moving like an insect. But it was huge, at least 8 feet tall." Susan's story sent chills down my spine. "What did it look like?" "Like a person, but wrong. Its arms and legs were too long, and they bent in too many places. And its fingers..." She shuddered. "Its fingers had claws that came out like a cat's, but much bigger. They were shiny, like metal." The doctor treating Susan showed me her wounds. 4 puncture marks, just like Carl Mitchell's, but not as deep. "She's lucky," the doctor said. "A few inches lower and those claws would have hit her heart. But there's something else. Her blood work shows traces of an unknown toxin. It's similar to a paralytic agent, but not from any snake or spider we know about." "Paralytic?" "It would have made her unable to move or speak, but she'd still be conscious, still able to feel everything." The doctor's face was grim. "She managed to get away before it took full effect." I interviewed Susan for over an hour, getting every detail I could. The thing that attacked her had moved without making a sound until it was right on top of her. It had climbed down a vertical cliff face like it was walking on level ground. And when it grabbed her with those claws, she'd felt a burning sensation as something was injected into her wounds. "It was hunting me," Susan said quietly. "The way it moved, the way it positioned itself above me. It knew exactly what it was doing. It wasn't an animal acting on instinct. It was thinking. After leaving the hospital, I drove back to the Ridge Trail. This time, I brought a partner, David Chen, a ranger from Shenandoah National Park, who specialized in technical cliff rescues. Dave was also an expert rock climber who could handle the vertical terrain better than anyone I knew. "So you think something is living on these cliff faces?" Dave asked as we geared up. "I think something is hunting from them," I replied, checking my climbing harness. "And I think it's been doing it for a while." We started our search at Henderson's Cliff, where Carl Mitchell's body had been found. Dave set up anchor points while I rappelled down to examine the rock face more carefully. What I found made my blood run cold. The scratch marks weren't just random gouges. They were everywhere. The entire cliff face was covered with them, some old and weathered, some fresh. They formed patterns, like territorial markers, and about 50 feet down, there was a horizontal crack in the rock that looked like it might be a cave entrance. "Dave," I called up, "I'm going to check out this cave." "Be careful," he called back, "and stay on radio." I swung myself over to the crack and shined my flashlight inside. It was definitely a cave, and it went back further than my light could reach. The walls were smooth, worn down by something moving through them regularly, and scattered on the cave floor were bones, human bones. The cave was worse than I'd imagined. My flashlight beam revealed a tunnel that stretched back into the mountain, and the floor was littered with remains. Not just bones, clothing, backpacks, hunting equipment. Some of it looked fresh. Some of it looked like it had been there for years. "Dave," I radioed up, "we need backup, and the coroner. There are multiple victims down here." I photographed everything I could see without disturbing the scene. Among the bones, I found a wallet with a driver's license dated 1985. Another belonged to a hiker who'd been reported missing in 1982. This thing had been hunting people for at least 6 years, maybe longer. The cave tunnel angled upward, following a natural crack in the rock face. I followed it for about 50 feet before it opened into a larger chamber. The smell hit me first. A mixture of decay and something else. Something sharp and chemical that burned my nose. The chamber was like a storage room. Piles of clothing were sorted into corners. Backpacks hung from rock protrusions like trophies. And in the center of the room was a nest of sorts. A depression lined with fabric and filled with more bones. But these bones were different. They were arranged in patterns, almost like someone was studying them, trying to understand them. My radio crackled. "Patricia, you need to get out of there. Now!" Dave's voice was tight with fear. I could hear something in the background, a scraping sound like claws on stone. I switched off my flashlight and listened. The scraping was coming from above me, somewhere in the cave system. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Something was moving through the tunnels, moving toward me. I backed toward the entrance as quietly as I could. But the scraping sounds were getting closer. And now I could hear something else. A soft clicking noise, like the sound an insect makes. I reached the cave entrance just as something dropped past me in the darkness outside. Something big enough to block out the sunlight for a moment. "Dave!" I yelled into the radio. "It's here! It's right here!" "I can see it," Dave shouted. "Back. It's climbing up toward you. Patricia, get out of there." I looked down and saw it. 8 feet tall, just like Susan Reynolds had described. Its limbs were too long and moved in ways that made my eyes hurt to watch. And it was climbing straight up the cliff face toward my cave. I clipped into my rope and rappelled away from the cave as fast as I dared. The thing reached the cave entrance just as I dropped past it, and I got my first clear look at the creature that had been killing people. It looked almost human, but everything was wrong. Its skin was gray and mottled like stone. Its arms and legs were stretched out twice as long as they should be. And its hands were tipped with curved claws that gleamed like metal. But the worst part was its eyes. They were large and yellow, and when they fixed on me, I could see intelligence there. This wasn't some mindless beast. It was thinking, planning. It reached out with one impossibly long arm as I descended, and its claws scraped against my helmet with a sound like nails on a chalkboard. I hit the ground running and didn't stop until I reached our equipment. Dave was already packing up our gear with shaking hands. "Did you see it?" I asked. "I saw enough," he said grimly. "We're leaving. Now." But as we hiked back toward our truck, I kept looking up at the cliff faces, and I kept seeing movement in the shadows. The thing was following us, moving from cave to cave through the tunnels in the rock. It was fast. 2 days later, we got news that made my worst fears real. Jake Morrison, the hunter who'd first shown me the claw marks, was found dead. Like Carl Mitchell, he'd been found at the base of a cliff. But Jake had been an experienced rock climber. There was no way he'd fallen accidentally. Jake's climbing partner, Tom Bradley, survived long enough to tell us what happened. They'd been scaling the north, each face of Devil's Tower, when something attacked them from above. "It came out of nowhere," Tom whispered from his hospital bed. One second Jake was climbing, the next second this thing was on him. It cut through his ropes like they were string. Tom's injuries were severe. Deep claw marks across his back and arms, and the same paralytic toxin in his bloodstream that Susan Reynolds had received. But he'd managed to rappel to safety before the creature could finish him off. "It played with him," Tom said, his voice hollow. "After it cut Jake's ropes, it caught him, held him against the rock face with those claws. Jake was screaming, but he couldn't move, and the thing just watched him, like it was curious." Dr. Kim's autopsy of Jake Morrison revealed the same precise claw wounds that Carl Mitchell had suffered. But Jake's injuries were worse. The claws had punctured deeper, and there were signs that he'd been conscious when they were inflicted. "This is escalating," Dr. Kim told me after the examination. "Each attack is more violent than the last, and the toxin levels are increasing too. Whatever this thing is, it's learning, getting better at what it does." The sheriff's department wanted to close the entire ridge area to hiking and hunting, but the State Park Service overruled them. Too much tourist revenue, they said. Too many hunters who'd already bought permits. Instead, they assigned Dave Chen to work with me as a partner and gave us authorization to hunt the creature. We were told to use whatever means necessary to eliminate the threat, but they had no idea what we were up against. Dave and I spent the next week mapping the cave system. Using climbing gear and rope techniques, we discovered that the caves formed a network that ran through the entire 15-mile ridge. The creature could move from one end to the other without ever touching the ground. "It's like a three-dimensional territory," Dave explained as we studied our maps. "Most predators control an area on the ground. This thing controls the vertical space too. It can hunt anywhere, and these cliffs." We also found more evidence of the creature's intelligence. In several caves, bones and equipment were arranged in patterns that suggested experimentation. The creature was learning about humans by studying its victims. "Look at this," Dave said, shining his flashlight on a cave wall. Scratched into the stone were what looked like tally marks. Dozens of them. It's keeping count. The final proof of the creature's intelligence came when we tried to set traps. Every snare we placed was found and destroyed. Every motion sensor was knocked down or torn apart. The creature knew we were hunting it, and it was adapting. Worse, it started hunting us back. The first sign that we'd become targets came on a cold morning in early December. Dave and I were rappelling down the south face of Eagle Rock when my rope started to fray. Not normal wear. The fibers were cut clean through like someone had taken a razor to them. "Dave," I called over, "check your gear." His rope had the same precise cuts, about halfway up. We were 60 feet from the ground when we noticed them. Without backup ropes, we would have fallen to our deaths. "It sabotaged our equipment," Dave said as we carefully made our way to a ledge. "But when? We checked everything this morning." The answer came when I looked up. Far above us, something was moving against the sky. A dark shape that clung to the cliff face and watched us with those terrible yellow eyes. It had climbed down while we were rappelling and cut our ropes. If we'd gone another 20 feet, we'd have dropped like stones. "It's playing with us," I realized, just like it played with Jake Morrison. That night we changed our approach. Instead of hunting the creature, we decided to let it come to us. We set up a secure campsite on a narrow ledge halfway up Henderson's Cliff, a position that could only be reached by technical climbing. If it wants us," Dave said as he secured our tent to the rock face, "it'll have to work for it." We took turns keeping watch, but the creature was smarter than we'd expected. It waited until the deepest part of the night, when both of us were exhausted from days of climbing. I was on watch when I heard the first sound, a soft scraping from somewhere above. I woke Dave with a touch to his shoulder. He nodded and picked up his ice axe, the closest thing we had to a weapon. The scraping sounds got closer. The creature was descending toward our ledge, using handholds that were invisible in the darkness. I could hear its claws clicking against the stone. Then it appeared. In the pale moonlight, the creature looked even more terrifying than it had in daylight. Its gray skin seemed to absorb light, making it hard to focus on. Its limbs moved with fluid grace that shouldn't have been possible for something so large. But the worst part was its face. It looked almost human, but the features were stretched and distorted. Its mouth was too wide, filled with teeth that gleamed like its claws, and those yellow eyes held an intelligence that was unmistakably hostile. It clung to the rock face directly above our ledge, studying us, planning its attack. "What do you want?" I called up to it. The creature tilted its head like a curious animal. Then it opened its mouth and made a sound I'll never forget. A low, thrumming noise that seemed to come from deep in its chest. It was almost like speech, but not quite. It was trying to communicate. Dave raised his ice axe, but I held up a hand to stop him. The creature wasn't attacking yet. It was curious, like it had never encountered prey that fought back before. For a long moment, we stared at each other. Predator and prey, separated by 30 feet of empty air. Then the creature moved. It dropped from the cliff face in a controlled fall, its claws sparking against the stone as it slowed its descent. It landed on our ledge with the grace of a dancer, despite its size. Up close, I could see details that made my skin crawl. Its claws weren't just sharp, they were hollow, like fangs. The paralytic toxin was injected through them, and its skin wasn't just gray. It was covered in tiny scales that shifted and moved like they were alive. Dave swung his ice axe at the creature's head. The creature caught the handle mid-swing with one hand and yanked Dave off his feet. Its other hand shot out, claws extended toward Dave's neck. I grabbed my own ice axe and drove it into the creature's arm. The steel point punched through its scaled skin, and the creature made a shrieking sound that echoed off the cliff faces. It released Dave and turned toward me, those yellow eyes blazing with rage. It was faster than anything had a right to be. Its claws raked across my shoulder, tearing through my jacket and into my flesh. I felt the burn of its toxin entering my bloodstream, and my arm started going numb. But I also noticed something important. My ice axe had hurt it. The steel had penetrated its hide and caused real damage. Dark blood was flowing from the wound I'd made. "Steel!" I yelled to Dave. "Use steel!" Dave was back on his feet, blood trickling from shallow claw marks on his neck. He drove his ice axe into the creature's leg, and it shrieked again. The creature realized it was trapped on the narrow ledge with two opponents who could actually hurt it. It did something I didn't expect. It retreated. With a movement too fast to follow, it launched itself off the ledge and began climbing straight up the cliff face. In seconds, it was lost in the darkness above. Dave and I were both bleeding and partially paralyzed from the toxin, but we were alive. More importantly, we'd learned something crucial. "It can be hurt," Dave said, examining his ice axe. "The steel point was stained with dark blood, and it bleeds." "It also thinks," I added. When it realized we could fight back, it retreated. It was smart enough to avoid a fair fight. But as we sat on that ledge, treating our wounds and waiting for dawn, I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature wasn't done with us. It had retreated, but not in defeat. It was planning. The attack came at dawn. Dave and I were preparing to rappel down from our ledge when rocks started falling from above. not random rockfall. Deliberately thrown stones that forced us to take cover. Then the creature appeared, but not alone. There were two of them. The second creature was smaller, maybe 6 feet tall instead of 8. Its movements were quicker, more erratic. A juvenile, I realized. The original creature had brought its offspring to help with the hunt. They attacked from opposite directions. The larger one dropped down from above while the smaller one climbed up from below. They were coordinating their assault, trying to trap us between them. Dave and I pressed back to back on the narrow ledge. There was nowhere to run. The larger creature reached us first. I drove my ice axe into its reaching hand, and it pulled back with another shriek. But the smaller one was already on the ledge, its claws slashing at Dave's legs. Dave stumbled, his wounded leg giving out. The smaller creature pounced, its claws aimed at his throat. I threw myself between them, catching the creature's claws on my ice axe handle. The force of its attack drove me to my knees, but I managed to keep its claws away from Dave's neck. The larger creature saw its chance and dove for me. I rolled aside, and it crashed into the smaller one. For a moment, both creatures were tangled together on the narrow ledge. That's when I noticed something that changed everything. The larger creature's claws were damaged. Several of them were broken or missing entirely, damage from our fight the night before. And without its full set of claws, it was having trouble maintaining its grip on the icy rock face. "The ice!" I yelled to Dave. "They can't grip ice." The night's freezing temperatures had covered the rock face with a thin layer of ice. The creature's claws, designed to dig into stone, couldn't find purchase on the slippery surface. Dave understood immediately. He pulled out his water bottle and poured it across the ledge. In the freezing air, it formed an ice slick within seconds. The smaller creature lost its footing and slid toward the edge of the ledge. It caught itself with its claws, but barely. The larger creature was backing away, recognizing the danger. I had an idea. A terrible, dangerous idea. I started climbing straight up the cliff face, using my ice axes to chip handholds in the rock. The creatures followed, just as I'd hoped they would. But I was leading them onto a section of cliff that faced north, a section that stayed frozen even in daylight. 50 feet up, I found what I was looking for. A shelf of ice that had formed from winter runoff. It looked solid, but I knew it was just a thin shell over empty air. The creatures were right behind me, their claws scraping against the icy rock as they struggled to keep up. The larger one's damaged claws were failing. It was falling behind, but the smaller one was still coming. I reached the ice shelf and carefully made my way across it, testing each step. Behind me, the smaller creature followed without hesitation. The ice held my weight. It didn't hold the creatures. With a crack like thunder, the ice shelf collapsed. The smaller creature plunged through, its claws scraping desperately at the smooth ice walls as it fell. Its shriek echoed off the canyon walls until it was cut short by the impact far below. The larger creature, seeing its offspring fall, made a sound of rage and grief that was almost human. It launched itself at me with reckless fury, its damaged claws slipping on the icy rock. I drove both my ice axes into the cliff face and held on as the creature slammed into me. Its weight nearly tore me loose, but I managed to hold on. The creature couldn't. Its damaged claws scraped uselessly against the ice-covered stone. For a moment, it hung suspended by one hand, its yellow eyes fixed on mine with pure hatred. Then its claws gave way completely. It fell 200 feet to the rocks below, its body bouncing off the stone outcroppings until it finally came to rest at the base of the cliff. Dave and I rappelled down to examine the creature's body, but we found nothing but dark stains on the rocks and a few broken claws. Whatever these things were, they didn't leave remains behind for long. The smaller creature's body had also vanished by the time the rescue team reached the bottom of the canyon. The only evidence of our encounter was our testimony and the scars we carried. Dave's injuries were more severe than mine. The creature's toxin had caused permanent nerve damage in his climbing hand. He could still use it, but the fine motor control needed for technical climbing was gone forever. "Guess I'm switching to desk duty," he said with a rueful smile as we waited in the hospital. I was luckier. My wounds healed clean, and the toxin worked its way out of my system within a few days. But the psychological scars went deeper. I couldn't climb anymore. Just looking up at a cliff face made my hands shake and my heart race. The thought of being on a vertical rock wall, exposed and vulnerable, brought back the memory of those yellow eyes and clicking claws. The official report listed the deaths as climbing accidents. The State Park Service didn't want to deal with the publicity that would come from admitting there had been unknown creatures hunting people in the mountains. But they did quietly close the entire ridge area to rock climbing and hiking. The official reason was unstable geological conditions. But the real reason was sitting in a filing cabinet in my office. Dozens of pages documenting attacks by creatures that weren't supposed to exist. I transferred to a different section of the forest, one with nice, flat hiking trails and gentle hills. My colleagues thought I'd had a nervous breakdown. Maybe I had. But sometimes, on clear winter mornings, I drive back to the ridge area and look up at those towering cliff faces. And sometimes, I see dark shapes moving against the sky. Shapes that move too smoothly with too many joints across vertical rock walls. The creatures aren't gone. I know that. We killed 2 of them, but there were others. The cave system we'd discovered was too extensive, and there were too many old bones. We'd eliminated a hunting pair, maybe even a family group. But the species survived. They're still up there, in the high places where humans rarely go. Still hunting, still learning. And they remember us. Last month I got a call from a ranger in West Virginia. They'd found claw marks on a cliff face in the New River Gorge. Marks that matched the photos I'd taken in George Washington National Forest. When I asked about missing persons reports in the area, there had been 3 unexplained disappearances in the past year. All of them experienced climbers. All of them found at the base of cliffs they should have been able to handle easily. I told the ranger to close the climbing area immediately. I told him what he was dealing with. I don't think he believed me, but I sent him copies of my files anyway. Photos of the claw marks, medical reports on the toxin, maps of the cave systems. Evidence that something is living on the cliff faces of our national forests. Something that sees humans as prey. The files were returned to me a week later with a note. Insufficient evidence for action. Recommend psychological evaluation for reporting ranger. So I keep the files in my desk drawer, along with the broken claw that Dave pried from his ice axe after our last encounter. Sometimes I take it out and hold it up to the light, watching the way it gleams like polished metal. It's a reminder that there are things in the wild places that don't belong in any biology textbook, things that have learned to hunt us with intelligence and patience, things that remember injuries and plan revenge. Most of the time I try not to think about them. I focus on my work in the safe, flat sections of the forest. I help lost hikers find their way back to the main trails. I investigate reports of bears getting into campsites. Normal ranger work, safe work. But on nights when the wind is strong and I can hear it howling through the high places, I sometimes dream of yellow eyes and clicking claws. I dream of being trapped on a narrow ledge with nowhere to run. And I wake up knowing that somewhere in the mountains, the ridge crawlers are still out there, still hunting, still waiting. The files sit in my desk drawer, and I hope I never have to open them again. But I keep them ready, just in case another ranger calls with stories of claw marks on cliff faces and disappearances that don't make sense. Because sooner or later, someone else is going to encounter what Dave and I found on those ridges. And when they do, they'll need to know what they're really up against. My name is Patricia Brennan, and I'm a park ranger. I've seen things in these mountains that most people wouldn't believe. I wish I didn't believe them either.